July 2006. Hezbollah guerrillas from Lebanon capture 2 Israeli soldiers in a cross-border raid. A barrage of rockets hit Israeli cities. The Israelis strike back. Within days, there is no way for Americans to leave Lebanon without help from the United States government.
In the beginning, everyone was taking it very light, they've hit something or they kidnapped 2 Israeli soldiers and stuff. But then we found out that no, that's serious. It is a war.
I think once the airport was bombed, then we all realized that we would have to seriously look at being able to provide capacity to take American citizens who want to leave out of the country.
At that point, we knew it was going to be bad, but we just had no idea how bad it was going to be.
People were panicked. They wanted to get out.
And the bombs were flying, exploding, buildings were being bombed, and people were basically running from pillar to post trying to find, even a temporary safe place to be.
Roads were taking hits from aerial bombardment throughout the country. Nearly all the bridges of the country were destroyed.
So essentially air, land, and sea were shut off. Only at that point when people realized that the country was being cut off from the outside world, that then they became fairly panicked.
I remember one incident. The woman she was crying so hard and she was like falling apart.
It was very stressful, I tell you. It wasn't easy. I was bored. The first 10 days I was kept in the hotel crying all the time.
The first challenge, identifying how many U.S. citizens were in Lebanon and wanted to leave. The U.S. Department of State issues travel warnings and recommendations that Americans register their visit or residence. Despite that, there were many, both summer tourists and long-term residents, who had not registered with the U.S. Embassy. The second challenge, getting them out.
The best tourist season that Lebanon had seen in years, that was what was forecast. And so everything literally changed overnight.
The evacuation itself required a lot of diplomatic wrangling because we basically asked the Lebanese authorities to waive all of their normal procedures.
The main problems that we had were firstly communication, because we were being overwhelmed, and the phone lines here at the embassy were not adequate, to the volume of calls that we were receiving.
There were a lot of people who were obviously very scared and exasperated by the situation. My staff and I tried our best to comfort people, give them a sense that we were here to help them.
And phone lines were out. People couldn't use their regular phones. People couldn't recharge their mobile phone batteries. So how did people communicate? People would use text messages, because you could send a text message, then turn the phone off again, and then several hours later turn it back on to see if you got a text message. So people were using text messages to relatives in Los Angeles who would then contact the embassy.
We had just endless queues of thousands of people who were waiting to be processed. Unfortunately, we didn't have adequate tents, so we could not provide cover from the sun for the majority of these people.
Providing water, we were able to get that from local sources. We had to rent portable lavatories. People were there for hours and hours and hours. Some of them became impatient.
This is the biggest U.S. government-facilitated movement of American citizens out of one country since World War II, so it's big.
I'd never done anything like this in my career. It was something that we did because it was the right thing to do at the time.
The response to a challenge of this magnitude was unprecedented. The U.S. Department of Defense joining State Department personnel in Lebanon, Cyprus, Turkey, and Washington, D.C., and acting quickly. State Department workers dropping their other official duties and tackling the job as a team with an important mission, removing American citizens from harm's way.
Lebanon was going through a humanitarian crisis. The country was running out of fuel. If the country ran out of fuel, the power plants would stop. The power plants were already down to 6 hours, 7 hours a day in brownouts, which meant the sewage treatment would stop, which meant that the water pumping would stop, which meant that we had a public health crisis if that had happened. So we ended up getting involved diplomatically on trying to solve that issue. our processing center was down the hill, but nevertheless, the American citizens still showed up at our gates, and to look out from our walls and to see thousands of Americans looking for us to help them, looking for us to help find ways to get out, is a searing experience. To realize they are looking to us to lead them to safety, and we're going to have to come up with a way to do so.
Quite frankly, on the first day, it seemed sufficiently chaotic that you needed to roll up your sleeves and be very engaged in kind of whatever was happening.
Having a person like Ambassador Battle here, as someone that's recognizable as a former ambassador, it really carried a lot of weight. And so when we would go out to this front gate to talk to the masses, the angry masses here, he really had a great way with these people.
For those Lebanese Americans who had lived here for a while, who'd watched TV, who they would look up and they would be sort of shocked to see the former U.S. ambassador out there grappling with the masses. But no, we were lucky to have him here.
With the helicopters taking off, people wanted to know why are some people going by helicopter while you're asking us to go down and wait in the sun. It was very hot, it was very humid, it was obviously very emotional. There was still bombing going on, and it wasn't, while it was not in this immediate neighborhood, it was still very, very difficult. It was not a normal procedure to have any American staff, let alone the ex-ambassador, at the gate in the face of this very large and emotionally charged crowd of people.
The USAID director in Beirut, his previous contacts with some very shadowy groups bore fruit and allowed us to extricate people from the south. After all, we were calling Dearborn, Michigan to find out where a lot of these people were. It was just things you just never can imagine.
And nobody had an expectation that this was going to go on for 34 days.
All hands on deck. That was the response from Department of State employees from around the world, all volunteering to help in Washington or wherever they were needed.
Walking in that first night, I remember being bombarded by people on the phone, the lights, the screens, the chalkboards with people's names and different bits of information and code word and different colors and scurrying and thinking, oh my God, I'm the coordinator. What the hell do I do?
A consular officer class at the Foreign Service Institute in Washington was greeted with a sign that read, "Congratulations, you've won a fabulous trip to Turkey." They became known as the Turkey 13.
We were told that afternoon to go home, get our passports, pack a bag, and show up the next day ready to leave. And some of us left that next night.
The first challenge was getting a passport seal through the Transportation and Security Administration. It's a very heavy metal object, and I got lots of questions with that.
When I came back from lunch and saw that I'd won a trip to Turkey, I was thrilled, but my wife, who was 9 months pregnant, was not. And I called her and told her I'm going to Turkey volunteering for the Lebanon evacuation. She said, "Oh, no, you're not." I said, "Oh, yes, I am. I'm not missing this." But fortunately, I got back in time for the birth.
We were the right group. We wanted to go. We wanted to be there. And we'll always carry it with us.
I don't think many of us could say that we've been involved in anything quite like this. The sort of layers of crisis. At times I felt like I was in a crisis management exercise that FSI provided crisis. They kept throwing more things. Just when you thought that you had everything, that you were able to handle everything, a new wrinkle was thrown in our direction. A new crisis was thrown in our direction.
Yeah, the ambassador ran the ship. The Marines reported to the ambassador.
It was very emotional to see them all come off in their khakis and combat outfits. Everybody was screaming, "God bless America." Very emotional, very, very good. They did anything we asked them to.
You know, how history plays funny games with you sometimes. This was the same unit that, unfortunately and very tragically, was the victim of the attack in the Marine barracks in 1983. So this was a very important mission for these Marines, and they approached it with incredible dedication and respect. It was almost like a conveyor belt. We had so many ships involved, so many helo fights. And the helos were coming in like Kennedy Airport. It was just amazing.
They called me the helicopter guy. I was the guy that mainly liaised with the Department of Defense in making sure that we had good information, basically in charge of the helicopters. I'm a cultural attaché. I'm the cultural guy. then I'm in charge of the helicopters.
In addition to logistical challenges, embassy staff also had to ensure sensitivity to the cultural and personal differences of the Americans being evacuated.
We had an injured lady. She refused the guy to touch her. So we were called, like me, Joel, and I think you, to go and help her because she doesn't want anyone else to touch her. So we were like surprised, no, why do you want the ladies? She said, no, I don't allow the men to touch me, so please help me to go.
So there were a number of elderly people who needed assistance, people in wheelchairs, people with walkers. At the other end of the spectrum, there were young parents, particularly mothers with babies, and who had left husbands and brothers and so forth behind in Beirut.
I'd say in general, one of the most difficult situations that we all encountered was the incredible amount of verbal abuse that we got from evacuees for many reasons. And we were patient with them. They were living in their country was at war. But it was most of it was over the top and uncalled for, and yet these were people that we had to help.
Once Americans left Beirut, the vast majority were transported to Cyprus and also Turkey. Department of State employees from Bolivia to Germany responding to the call to make the evacuees as comfortable as possible for the long ride home, but not without complications.
There was a big problem getting charter aircraft to come to the base and take people away. So we had all of these people, and they all wanted to leave right away. You know, at the beginning, they were very understanding, and they would always clap for us and say, oh, thank you for all that you're doing. But then by the second, third, fourth day that they were there, they started to really get angry about what was going on.
What we found with the situation there in Turkey was that you had these sometimes large extended families, cousins, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, some of whom were U.S. citizens, some of whom were green card holders, some of whom had no documentation that would allow them to travel to the United States at all. And they weren't nice, neat family packages. Some of those people could only travel to the United States with action by DHS, the Department of Homeland Security. That really required having DHS folks on the ground there in Turkey. And it wasn't until the last few days that we got that kind of support. So I think there was a real lesson learned out of that.
Folks back home ask, where do you work? Oh, you work for the State Department. What is that? Do you issue driver's licenses? Do you register cars? And you never really quite have a ready answer, except now I do. I work for the State Department. What does that mean? Me and 12 other people had picked up and went to Turkey to help Americans escape from a war zone. That's something that grandma and grandpa back home can understand.
Having a unit go in rather than individual people pulled from different places actually ended up being one of our greatest strengths because we could already work together.
The defense attaché officer got married in the middle of the war to a Lebanese woman, and it was the best party I've ever been to.
I had been working with my fiancée to get married in October, and when it looked like at one point we were seriously considering we might have to evacuate the embassy. And so I spoke with my fiancée and we decided to go ahead and up the date. I could not envision myself leaving and saying, well, I hope I come back in time, I hope I come back sometime later.
It was thrown together in like 24 hours. Everyone kind of like put aside their cares for about 2 hours, and we just had a wonderful, wonderful party. And it was one of the highlights of my State Department career.
We evacuated 15,000, mostly American citizens. Maybe 2,000 were close relatives of American citizens. I understand it was the largest overseas civilian evacuation in history. We did it without a single injury.
I used to get so many emails from them thanking the embassies, thanking the staff of their work and the way they were handled, getting them into the compound, put them on the plane.
In fact, there was almost too much communication, to be honest. I think it's just a function of all the technology that's available, but there were so many avenues or lanes of communication coming into the embassy that it was hard to keep on top of all of it, and it led to some duplication of effort.
There was no guidebook for us. There's nobody telling us how to do what we did. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't always smooth. But we got everybody who wanted to leave this country out safely. We had to be creative. We had to think creatively on the ground. We had to be flexible. The U.S. government came through for its people.
While most had never experienced a situation like the evacuation of Lebanon, the lessons learned are invaluable.
We learned, for instance, that compiling lists of evacuees simply is not manageable when as many as 15,000 people want to leave and you can't communicate with the people who might be on your list or not. So a first come, first served evacuation process is really the only practical option when communications are down, when roads are interrupted.
I don't know how the information flow can be changed that dramatically, but there was almost an excess of information flooding into a relatively lightly manned post.
I would say it was an email crisis, basically. I think Washington didn't have as much discipline as they might have in what they sent to us. I was impressed, though, by how the State Department now is dealing with this email.
If possible, and I recognize that people's schedules might make it difficult, I would have the same people on each shift. And having the same people really gave you a team spirit, a camaraderie that helped get through the night.
It could have been better if we didn't have people sleeping on the floors. That wasn't some good thing to see. Emotionally got people affected in a weird way, like do they know what they're doing? Will they take good care of us? Where will we end up when they take us from here? That kind of thing.
I would say to any officer who's involved with this on the ground that despite how valuable you think you are, you need to go home and take a rest very early on. Most of us stayed up for 3 days straight. And in the end, we all collapsed at the same time.
Now, obviously there were some glitches, things that we have learned for the future. I view this as minor complaints. Somebody didn't get out on the day promised, but got out the next day. Things like that. Someone who couldn't get ice cream, complain about that.
So we always talk about thinking outside the box in the State Department, but how often do you actually get to do it? And we did. We thought outside the box. We thought in ways that were most efficient, most practical, and we did it. And I don't think anybody could say that it was not a success. Of course, people are going to complain. They're going to say we weren't fast enough, we didn't disseminate information enough, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is everybody got out who wanted to leave.
I think if the American people truly understood what the armed forces and what the relevant sections in the embassy did, they would be exceedingly proud and just say, hey, I think the taxpayers got their money's worth on that one.
This is a once in a career, definitely life-changing.
It makes me look at all of my colleagues in the Foreign Service in a different way, having watched us pull together as a team in this international effort. It especially impresses me the work that was done by the Foreign Service National College, people who came from posts all over the world to help out in Lebanon.
The result, it is that the Americans came out unharmed and healthy. In fact, we added one American. We had one child born on board. One of the other things I heard was that it had been faster coming out of Beirut than it was getting your luggage at the BWI airport. And so we all broke into, gales of laughter.
This has been the experience of my life. I've been in the Foreign Service for 30 years as one who specialized primarily in political issues and analysis and economics. I never envisioned that having to stage an evacuation under these circumstances would be something that I would be doing. And there were no precedents. As we worked with our colleagues in the State Department, we were simply going from hour to hour making decisions on an hourly basis, and in the end we're very, very proud